All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're talking about a tool that, let's be honest, millions of us are using every single day, ChatGPT. We use it for work, for school, for creativity. But have you ever really stopped and asked yourself what it might be doing to the long-term health of your brain?
Now, that's not my opinion. That is a direct warning from neuroscientists who are actually studying this stuff. It's a shocking thing to hear, I know, and it's exactly why we need to understand what really happens when we start to hand over our thinking to AI.
And look, this isn't some far-off, futuristic problem. This is a real post from somebody online when ChatGPT went down recently. And yeah, it's kind of funny on the surface, but it points to a much more immediate issue, right? This growing feeling that we can't even function without it. So, what does the science actually say about this?
Okay, let's get into the research that's really setting off all the alarm bells. Because this isn't just a hunch people have. It's something that scientists are now actively measuring in the lab.
A huge study out of MIT grabbed participants from places like Harvard and MIT and had them do some writing. But here's the twist. One group could only use their own brain, another group could use Google, and a third got to use ChatGPT. And all the while, researchers were scanning their brain activity. What they found was pretty astonishing.
So what did they find? This: a 47% collapse in overall brain activity for the group using ChatGPT. Let me just say that again, because it's wild. Nearly half of their brain's activity just gone.
I mean, the contrast on the brain scans was just night and day. The no-tool group, their brains were lit up like a Christmas tree, firing on all cylinders. But the ChatGPT group, they showed the absolute weakest brain activity. They were essentially putting their own brains into low-power mode to get the task done.
And the consequences went way beyond just brain activity. Memory scores for the AI users plummeted. Get this, a shocking 83% of them couldn't even remember what they'd just written just minutes later. They felt no real ownership over it. But maybe the most frightening part was this last one. Even after the tool was taken away, their brain stayed stuck in that low gear mode. It created a kind of cognitive debt that just lingered.
So why does this happen? What is the actual mechanism at work in our heads? Well, it all comes down to a really fundamental principle of neuroscience. The key idea is something called cognitive load. It's just a fancy term for how much work your brain is actually doing. And the best analogy is this. Using ChatGPT for a tough thinking task is like going to the gym and choosing to lift a 2-pound weight instead of a 20-pound one. You're just not going to build any muscle that way. It really boils down to that old saying, use it or lose it. Every single time you learn something new or struggle with a hard problem, you are literally strengthening the connections in your brain. So when we consistently outsource that struggle, those connections, they just start to weaken.
And this isn't just a theory. It has huge real-world consequences. We see it clearly in dementia research. There is a direct link between how engaged you keep your brain and how resilient it is. People with more education, people who are lifelong learners, they build up this cognitive reserve, and it can significantly delay the onset of symptoms later in life.
This totally explains why the memory scores were so bad in that MIT study. If you don't do the hard work of creating the ideas and wrestling with the words, that information never gets properly stored in your long-term memory. You're basically telling your hippocampus, your brain's memory hub, to just sit this one out.
Okay, I know, this all sounds pretty grim. But it's not the whole story. The reality is a lot more nuanced, which brings us to a really critical pivot here, moving from the problem to the solution.
This is the big question, right? Is the answer to just unplug everything and throw these amazing tools away? Well, not necessarily.
Let's think about another revolutionary tool for a second, the calculator. Sure, it reduced the brain work for doing long division, but did it make us dumber? No. It freed up our mental energy to tackle much bigger, more complex problems in engineering and physics and finance. It automated the grunt work, which allowed us to do higher-level thinking.
The CEO of NVIDIA really captured this perfectly. Avoiding AI is just not an option if you want to stay relevant. So the debate isn't if we should use it, it's how. The whole goal is to master the tool, not become a servant to it.
And this brings us right to the core of it. The risk isn't the tool itself, it's how we approach it. The danger is when we replace our thinking instead of assisting it. It's the difference between being actively engaged and just passively outsourcing.
Which brings us to the most important part of this whole explainer. What are the practical, actionable things you can do to make AI a partner in strengthening your brain, not weakening it?
Well, experts have landed on a pretty simple but powerful 3-part strategy. First, amplify, don't replace. Use AI to improve your own original thoughts. Second, alternate your tasks. Deliberately switch between using AI and going brain only to keep your mind flexible. And finally, engage in deep learning. Flip the script and have the AI challenge you.
Here's a perfect real-world example of what I mean by amplify. I had to write a long memo recently. So I did all the hard work first, wrote the whole thing myself, which took hours. Then I fed it to ChatGPT and said, critique this as if you were a top consultant. The feedback it gave me was fantastic, and I used it. But the key is I did the heavy cognitive lifting myself, up front.
And you know, this idea of how we interact is getting surprisingly personal. Some research even suggests that just being polite to an AI can engage the social centers of our brain. And this is going to new extremes. Believe it or not, a surprising 19% of Americans have already had some kind of social or even romantic interaction with AI. It just shows how deeply these tools are getting woven into our lives.
This quote right here, this is the sweet spot. This is what you should be aiming for. When you use the tool correctly, the very act of trying to write a clear, detailed, intelligent prompt forces you to think so critically that you often figure out the answer yourself before you even hit send. The process becomes the benefit.
So we've covered the alarming research, the science behind it, and the strategies you can use to navigate all this. And it all comes down to one final, personal question. Ultimately, this technology is a mirror. It just reflects our own intentions back at us. It can be a whetstone for your mind, or it can be a cognitive crutch. It can make smart people exponentially more effective, but it can also let us outsource our thinking entirely. The choice and the consequences, they're completely up to us.